Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional from The Hague, Netherlands, Mr. Eelco H. Dykstra. Eelco, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Eelco is the chairperson of a 2020 Vision Program and the DIEM or the DIEM network. So, Eelco, let me start by asking you my first question, which is, tell me about your own amazing journey.
Well, given the amount of time that we have, I will summarize by saying that my challenge is about misery. I wanted to know more about misery. So when I had the choice between music or medicine, I chose medicine. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I would have become a cellist. In medicine, I specialized in accident and emergency medicine. But at some point, the misery of patients was not enough. I wanted more misery. Mm-hmm. I wanted systems misery. And so I spent my life basically starting with dealing with human misery, but then developing to systems misery. Think about earthquakes, ethnic violence, terrorism, floods, all kinds of misery. So I became a global nomad who has been intrinsically involved on the ground, with the boots on the ground, in the mud, but also behind the scenes, coordinating and policy-wise with anything that you can imagine that has a misery side to it. And, you know, the reason why I can do this is probably also because I am, by design, indestructibly positive, like yourself. Mm. These are people who everything is black, and then there is hang on, I see one part that is gray. Mm. So we have something to work with. Yeah. And that is, I think, the best summary I can give you in the shortest period of time.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I love this very, very short description, even of such an amazing journey. But Eelco, based on your own experience, what do you see as some of the most pressing issues that we need to collectively address?
Well, let me start by saying that obviously, I mean, just look around you worldwide, every walk of life. Clearly, we are dealing with the meta crisis. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can easily almost 30 crises that have all now come together. And these cannot be addressed singularly anymore. They have to be addressed in their interrelations, if it were. Mm. And we are so busy putting out fires all over the world that we don't seem to be addressing the underlying causes. And based on the work that I've done together with people who are infinitely more smarter than I am, mm-hmm. but I sort of pulled that stuff together and over decades, we arrived at the conclusion that there are two overarching problems that you see no matter what crisis you're dealing with, mm-hmm. what fire. And this is, on the one hand, fragmentation, meaning loose ends, too many loose ends that mm-hmm. need to be connected, and lack of impact. So mm-hmm. results that do not meet expectations.
Correct.
The problem with these two overarching meta problems is that they need to be addressed simultaneously and together instead of separately and consecutively. And we have plenty of people who can address fragmentation. We have plenty of people who work on improving lack of impact or reducing the lack of impact. But what we are short of are people who can do both, because that is, I think, what is needed most. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. So let's now talk a little bit about Pracademia. I love this term that you have conceived when I was reading about you. Can you explain the concept of Pracademia and how it bridges the gap between practice and academia?
Well, when we are talking about a meta crisis, which we are, if you see things for what they are and not what you are afraid they might be or would like it to be, but then we know that we cannot solve complex problems by linear thinking. Mm-hmm. unfortunately, we see a lot of people who think that you can actually solve complex problems with linear thinking. That's simply not true, unfortunately. So it's all very complex. You know the acronym VUCA: volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Anyway, this if you want to solve a meta crisis, you have to use a meta approach. And combining the lessons learned from practice with the lessons learned from academia is part of a meta approach. And this meta approach, you have to imagine this is an all-encompassing umbrella under which any and all entities, individuals and organizations can unite instead of compete with each other. And you need three elements for a meta approach. And not just one or two, but all three at the same time, which is making it not easy to see the forest through the trees. But these three things, briefly, the first one is you have to have a common frame of reference, which is a shared framework that is so attractive that everybody can unite and validate. We use the 9 universal roadblocks meta model for that. The second essential ingredient for a meta approach is you need to have a shared methodology. And that needs to be design-based. It needs to offer co-ownership, allow for co-creation, but also for peer review and consensus scoring. So you know where to start based on the highest degree of consensus and prioritization. And the third element is a meta question. So whereas the framework and the methodology addresses the structure and the process, the third element of meta approach addresses outcome. Because the third element is a meta question, which goes as follows. How good is good enough? And this question is crucial because it identifies what result you are aiming for. It's the dot on the horizon that you need to put there. Otherwise, all these people that you want to unite will not go with you on the journey in the direction of this dot on the horizon.
Okay. And, I don't know much about Pracademia or the Pracademic approach, but Eelco, what are some common misconceptions that you have encountered about your Pracademic approach?
Well, see, the first thing is you have to bring them together. And there, in the German language, you have a word that is called Berührungsangst, a fear of touching each other. So you have to overcome that. At a higher level, the academics, they are mostly engaged in answering the what question, whereas practitioners address the how question. And that is, I think, key to the Pracademic approach. But you're not there with just being a Pracademic or combining it and doing Pracademia events like I have done in South Africa, for instance, and other places. You need also the other stakeholders to involve. So these could be local communities, the end users, no resilience without local community involvement. And not by retrofit, but they have to have a seat at the table right from the beginning. Public entities, private sector, they all need to come together. And Pracademia, I think, is interesting because it addresses the what question with the how question. We know the what, we know what the problems are, but we spend so much time, energy, and money about talking about the problems. But I wish we would spend the same amount of time, energy, and resources to actually find solutions. And that's the idea of the International From Risk to Resilience movement. It is not just the 9 universal roadblocks that stand in the way of implementing lessons learned. These are the same roadblocks that stand in the way of transitioning from a risk-based approach to a resilience-based approach, which focuses on solutions.
Great response. Great response. And Eelco, how does this Pracademic approach enhance the effectiveness of emergency management?
Well, when you talk about the effectiveness, I'd like to point you back to the third element of a meta approach, which is the question, how good is good enough? Because both academics and practitioners now need to agree on what to quantify the result of their joint activities. Now, that is almost synonymous with effectiveness. So back to this question, how good is good enough?
Okay. And how do you think this approach can be applied beyond the field of emergency management?
Well, the term universal roadblocks is not just a fancy name. When you want to do a meta approach, universal needs to be taken literally. So it should be applicable to any field. When you take the 9 universal roadblocks and you, for instance, prioritize them, or you score a performance, how are we doing on 1, 2, 3? Then you get sort of a score. You can apply it to basically everything. You can use it in the design phase before something happens. You can use it for monitoring during, and you can use it for evaluation afterwards. But to give you one tongue-in-cheek example, you can use the 9 universal roadblocks also in marriage counseling.
Okay.
Where you review how the two entities in a relation, conflict, how they view their individual and their joint performances in the context of these 9 universal roadblocks. Yeah.
Okay. And what role do universities and research institutes play in fostering Pracademic collaborations?
Yeah. Well, I mean, not as big as one would expect or hope for, because the many universities are inward-looking and resemble more ivory towers than, say, open outreach type, all-inclusive institutions, which is complicated by the fact that many of these universities and research institutions are in stifling competition with each other to attract students, to attract staff, to publish papers, and to get research funding. So there's a lot to be gained still. I think we need to improve there too.
Okay. One more question relating to Pracademia, and then we'll move to another segment. How do you balance the theoretical and the practical aspects in your work as a Pracademic?
Well, basically, it's by linking fragmentation and lack of impact. So, if I think anyone, organization and individual-wise, needs to think about how to separate their energy and their time and their resources, and say now I have a thinking day, and tomorrow I'll have a production day. And so balancing the thinking with the production side of the house is like balancing fragmentation and lack of impact.
And can you give me an example of how this balance happens?
Well, it is. I think that is so. Well, the fragmentation is so huge. You go to questions like what are we afraid of, or what should we be afraid of, and I think eventually when you talk about all these crises, whether it's migration, climate, or you name it, they all lead to the same thing, which is a collapse or a disruption of your system of essential services. So it's like water, food, transport, energy, communication, finance, governance, safety, security, all these essential elements that we need for living systems. And what we need is we need to find something, which is this framework and the method and the question that sort of is that runs right through all these sectors. Because in the past, the energy sector was on its own, and the water and the food sector on their own. But now, in this global world of ours, it is all this one system. They're all interconnected. And so finding this transdisciplinary, this all-encompassing meta approach is no longer an item of luxury, but of necessity.
Very interesting. So, Eelco, now let's move to your other concept, which is daily impact emergency management, or DIEM. Tell me a little bit about the origin and the mission of the daily impact emergency management program.
Yeah. Well, the origin is in the tremendous high levels of frustration from practitioners, policymakers, everybody really, also the man in the street, about all these lessons learned that are not being used in practice. And so we combined a number of these people who were so frustrated into network with the assignment, make an inventory, take stock of what prevents us from implementing these lessons learned. And so we created, over decades of independent research, we created a huge long list of what other people told us were standing in the way, obstacles for this. And we whittled this down to a short list. And then we ended up with 9 of these universal roadblocks, and we put that together into a model whereby these 9 roadblocks are interacted, but also are given a context. So that's the origin. We work with partners and contacts and fellows. Fellows are the most active one. Every year we provide 4 to 6 fellows with whom we work on a one-on-one basis. The profile, I've been known to say that the worst thing that could happen to any organization, and I'm curious as to what your response would be, given your background, but I've been known to say that the worst thing that can happen to any organization is that it gets a headquarters.
Right.
Anyway, that's tongue-in-cheek comment, but it is a social enterprise, so it combines the best of the private sector knowledge and experience, wisdom, but for the public good. It is a think and do tank. The profile is 3-dimensional across thinkers who are not afraid, so they're proactive, not reactive. Have an eye on practice and not just on paper. Have obviously an international orientation. And very important, Ashutosh, is they have to have maintained their sense of humor. Because people in organizations who don't have a sense of humor take everything too serious, including themselves.
Very interesting.
And that's something that does not fit.
Very great response. So, Eelco, you've been speaking about the 9 universal roadblocks a few times. And, these have been identified by the Daily Impact Emergency Management. Tell me a little bit more about these 9 universal roadblocks and why are they so significant?
Well, first of all, imagine the 9 universal roadblocks as a cake. And the cake consists of 2 halves. One half is fragmentation and the other half is lack of impact. And what we have done is we have dotted these 9 universal roadblocks at the rim of this cake, depending on whether they're more closely aligned to lack of impact or fragmentation. What we do, and that's the framework, and then the methodology is we ask 4 questions to people during briefings, workshops, seminars, lectures. And we have done this all over the world for many years. And the first question we ask is what keeps you awake at night? Primary concern. What is the concern that you feel need to be addressed but is not being addressed enough? The second question is, which of these 9 universal roadblocks, given your answer to question 1, which one is the most relevant, the most important one, the one that you think that needs to be addressed first?
Right.
Third question is, briefly explain why you made that choice. But the key is, and that's the value of the roadblock. The fourth question is, how would you recommend to solve or bypass the roadblock that you gave a priority?
Right.
So we harvest recommendations from individuals and organizations and through scoping sessions on how to solve it. So what is the problem? How are we going to solve it? From risk to resilience. And then we subject them to peer review and a consensus score. Why do we do that? Simple, because we want impact. And you will find, everybody who has any experience will find that government bureaucrats responsible for policy making are largely inert. They're busy and they're not all that open. But when you offer them low-hanging fruit, a recommendation with a high consensus score, they might look at this. And same applies for politicians. Politicians are opportunistic most of the time. So also they would rather engage with a recommendation that has a strong, high consensus score than one that is sort of in the middle. And that's how we sort of also connect and address the can-do, i.e., the lack of impact. Because it's like you can give all the advice and the recommendations that you want, but it needs to land as well. So the question is, how can we generate impact by getting the right people where interested, committed, and ready to act. And those are the 4 steps to create.
Well said. Well said. So, Eelco, I have time for 2 more questions. My next question is, how does DIEM incorporate technology and innovation into its emergency management strategies?
Yeah. Well, at the basic level, it is through technology, through communication. And our end game is to have, like similar to what you are doing with your program, what we would like to work towards, our own dot on the horizon, is what we refer to as an interactive repository of peer-reviewed conclusions and recommendations on these roadblocks. So there's sort of a central library, if you want, where people that can go and visit, and they enter into a kind of a matrix, and they can see what is there, but they all have to do something themselves, like read their own conclusion and recommendations on a particular topic, or add a consensus score or something like this. Interactive repository. Now, I have to say, DIEM is more about functional requirements than about technological specifications. The reason for that is that functional requirements should drive the development of technological specifications. But what we see in practice is often the other way around, and which is very unfortunate. So DIEM is connecting, hence partners, fellows, and contacts, with partners who sort of specialize more in the technological specifications and how it applies. And one example, I've given you one name for potential broadcast. She's an amazing lady, and she has established the technology leadership lab, which specifically looks at the role of technology, then with her in the context of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But so we work with these kind of
Very interesting. Yeah. Fantastic. And my last question to you, can you share an example of a DIEM project that has had a significant impact on a local community?
Yes, I mean, we can, I mean, it could be very local. We are currently engaged in discussions on how to extract lessons learned for the future after mall fire in Reykjavik, Iceland, for instance. One of our fellows is busy with that. But one big example that I can look back at is we were involved in the siege of Sarajevo between 92 and 95. And we developed a plan on how to improve local emergency response capacity in Sarajevo. Unfortunately, it didn't get funded in Sarajevo. But when Al-Qaeda blew up the US embassies in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and in Nairobi, Kenya, they took this program and funded a $31 million 3-year program on how to improve local emergency response capacity in East Africa. And that was significant because we trained all local people in all the various aspects of emergency preparedness, emergency response, and emergency recovery. But also in terms of earthquakes in Turkey, we have been involved in that. Indonesia, Hurricane Katrina in
the US,
and then that's just a brief bouquet of the flowers of experience that we can offer.
Amazing, amazing. And on that note, Eelco, thank you so much for speaking to me about your own amazing journey. Thank you for talking to me about the 2 meta problems, which you said were so interesting: fragmentation and lack of impact. These are really 2 overarching problems that the world faces. Thank you for telling us so much about Pracademia. This is a topic that I learned a lot of new things from you about. Thank you also for covering DIEM, or the Daily Impact Emergency Management, in some level of detail to give all of us a basic understanding of what its capabilities are. Thank you so much for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
And the same to you and all your viewers and listeners.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.